Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the generations of Noah in our continuing study of the book of Genesis. Genesis chapters 1 through 5, we have creation history. We are introduced to Adam and Eve, and then Adam's sons. And remember, we had the son Cain, who murdered his brother, but a genealogy follows all the family line of Cain. And then following that in chapter 5, we have the descendants of Adam through Seth, going all the way to Noah. And in that, we have a graphic picture of the technological development of mankind, where of the sons of Lamech, we have one who was the father of those who dwell in tents, and then another who's the father, sort of the originator of musical instruments, and then another who gets the idea of working with various sorts of metals, and in that sense becomes the father of all who do metal work. So mankind begins to learn and advance, and if I can say that term, evolve. I don't mean like in the evolutionary sense, but he grows and develops. And there's a picture of that in those early chapters of Genesis. And so I have 10 generations from Adam all the way to Noah. That's especially through that line of Seth. When I come to Genesis chapter 6, now I have the Noahic history. This time the focus will be on Noah and his sons, and there's going to be a description in chapter 10, a laying out of the ethnic, that is the national development of mankind as the nations are brought into existence. And again, there's going to be 10 generations from this time from Noah to Terah, who will have 3 sons. Now, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, the beginning of this section, these are the records of the generations of Noah. Or as the Hebrew says, these are the Toledot, the generations of Noah. And then Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Remember, we saw in the previous chapter where Enoch walked with God and didn't die. But now Noah also is said to walk with God. And Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they're given in the order of importance to the passage. So these are the records of the generations of Noah. These are the generations of Noah. And we've seen that phrase used already back in chapter 2, where these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. And then we saw it in chapter 5, where these are the generations of Adam. And now these are the generations of Noah, and we're going to see the generations of Terah and of Abraham and of a number of other people. And this connotates a new chapter division in the story of the book of Genesis. Now, this section is going to, and notice the outline of this whole section on the story of Noah. We're going to begin with Noah having 3 sons. That will be in verse 10. We just read that. When we get to verse 18, we'll see God making a covenant, establishing a covenant with Noah, and in that will be the promise to destroy the earth with a flood. As a part of that covenant promise, judgment's coming, and yet Noah's going to be delivered, and then there'll be the command to take food. That'll be in verse 21, chapter 6, verse 21. Noah and his family will enter the ark, and then we'll actually see the story of the flood, and that will be in chapter 7, verse 11, where the windows of heaven open, and you actually have the flood coming all the way to chapter 8, verse 13, and we're going to expand much more on that section. But then they'll be corresponding to chapter 7, verse 1, where Noah and his family entered the ark. Now they're going to come out of the ark in chapter 8, verse 14. There will be a command regarding food, this time in chapter 9, verse 14, a command not to eat blood. There was a command to take food in 6:21. Now the command is not to eat certain things, not to eat blood. Again, there will be that covenant promise, that covenant section, just as the covenant is mentioned in chapter 6, verse 18. Now God will actually establish his covenant in chapter 9, verses 8 through 17. And again, there'll be a promise, but this time the promise will be that he will not destroy the earth again with a flood. You see, the first promise that comes when the covenant is first mentioned in chapter 6, verse 18, is that God says, I'm going to destroy the earth with a flood. Now he promises, I won't destroy the earth again with a flood. Now he doesn't say he'll never destroy it again, but not with a flood. And finally, we're going to to close this section with one more reference to Noah's 3 sons, and that's going to take us into another story. So, chapter 6, verse 11, "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt." Now, do you notice the repeated words? He said the earth was corrupt, and then he looked upon the earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. The Hebrew word shakath that is used here, corrupted, or it's that same term is also going to be used to destroy something, to corrupt it, to mess it up, to sort of ruin it. In verse 13, we're going to see the same word used. "Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I am about to destroy." To corrupt, to destroy. It's the exact same Hebrew word, "them with the earth." So God says, look, they have ruined the earth. Now I'm going to do it. I'm going to ruin it too in a much different way. This is a reminder where the same period is referenced by Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, as Jesus says, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating, they were drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be." Now, Jesus takes the days of Noah and he says it's going to happen again. And he doesn't reference any particularly sinful aspect of it. He doesn't say, well, the same level of sin is going to come and then the judgment is going to come. No, actually what he references is that life is going to be continuing sort of business as usual. There's nothing wrong with eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. You know, all those things are just a part of life. Life is going to be business as usual, just like it was in Noah's day, until the flood came. That is, even though I think they may have had the promise of a coming judgment, we have other references in the scripture to say that, they did not pay attention to those promises. And so it was business as usual until the judgment of God came. And what Jesus says, it's going to happen again. That once again, you're going to have sort of business as usual, and then there will come a day when the Son of Man is going to come. And that's going to change everything. That will bring judgment upon the earth, and those who were prepared for it will find salvation, and those who are not will find that day of judgment and destruction and ruin.